All right, so here's Group 1's discussion on the case studies. One of our members is currently in quarantine, so she will not be here, and we were unable to get a hold of her to video in on phone. So
We did try.
She is not here. Case study 1, the winter party. So the first questions are, Mr. Olson suggests that they call the event a holiday party, try to include all of the holidays. What do you think he meant by all of the holidays? Do you believe his suggestion is a good one? Why or why not?
Well, personally, I think it can be. Growing up in a primarily Jewish and Catholic community, they would always call it winter recess or try and avoid those very specific ones. Maybe not because the students will want to, but sometimes because the parents are very religious. Like, I know there were a few members of my class whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors, so they were very big on like Jewish tradition. And this needs to stay in our family because of what happened to us in the past. So I would sometimes hear the argument, oh, keep Christ in Christmas, blah, blah, blah. But I always felt that, no, let's be somewhat inclusive. If you're in a primarily Christian area, it's fine. If you want to tell me Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, I'm not going to be offended by it. But I can see how some people are. But in at least the teaching environment, I feel you should try and be as inclusive as possible.
You don't always know like what a student believes religiously because well, it's a public school. You don't always know that. We don't all go to a Catholic school or stuff like that. I recently found out one of my best friends of 10 years now. I had no idea he was a practicing Jew. I had no idea because it just never came up in conversation. So I think Mr. Olson meant good when he said that, and I think it's a very good step forward to say holiday party or winter party and not Christmas party, because it was just because you don't know somebody practices something different doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because you don't know that there are other religions at your school doesn't mean that there's only Christianity at your school. And giving credit to those who are agnostic or atheists, they can still take part in Christmas traditions, such as the bringing together of family or presents or stuff like that, but they don't, well, you say they don't have the Christ portion of Christmas. It's more just a time of good pleasure being with friends.
Holiday.
Yeah. So I think he did do good by that, and I think that was a good idea on his part.
Yes.
Question 2.
What kind of privilege can happen when teachers and schools turn decision-making over to parents? How can teachers and schools encourage parent engagement and empowerment and ensure that multiple viewpoints are heard?
Well, it's a complicated question because you obviously need to factor in the parents in whenever you're making a decision, because at the end of the day, you are essentially charged with keeping their child safe, and no teacher ever wants them to feel isolated or alone.
Mm.
At the same time, you just need to be aware that you need to teach for everyone. So what maybe I want my son to be taught might be different from what you want your son to be taught. I might want my son brought up with a very heavy emphasis on Christian values, but you might want your son brought up more with an open metropolitan kind of vibe of everything. So a teacher needs to be able to balance both of those without necessarily making either parent feel like, hey, I'm stepping on your toes, or we're just going to push you to the side because your beliefs or whatever are outdated. So you kind of have to walk that line between being friendly to the parents and also putting your foot down and saying, this is my classroom and I think I know what's best for my students.
I completely agree. And I think like in the setting of a school, I think it's a very good idea to get as many different viewpoints as you can from all of the different students, parents, because the parents who care the most are the ones who are going to be the ones with different viewpoints. Like, if we know that there is one family here who believes something very differently from the rest, I want them to be encouraged to kind of say, hey, I know this is a primary Catholic, let's just say Catholic, we are going to a primary Catholic region, but I still want to make sure that my son or daughter or child, or whatever they identify as, is getting some good education on X beliefs. I feel like that's a good thing to do. And the question says, how can teachers and schools encourage parent engagement and empowerment and ensure the multiple viewpoints are heard? Have open meetings, have open discussions. Like at the end of every 9 weeks or so, get parents to come in and tell them what they think of the school and how they're students are currently being taught. I think that's a great thing to do, and I think they are right on path to doing it.
Yes.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Nope, that's all good. Yep.
Okay, so the final question, what role can the teacher play in either ensuring equality or ensuring privilege in the way that the community with or hear from different parents? How can a teacher's biases, prejudices, subconscious impact who is truly heard? So what I think is essentially being asked by that question is how can a teacher's previously held beliefs and ideas impact their ability to teach in the classroom? And I think that's a very interesting question because depending on what region you're from and your cultural origin, it can definitely impact how you tend to view the world.
Mhm.
Like coming from New York, I can tell you very matter-of-factly that there isn't a lot of, even though religion is a part of it, it never really felt like it was a core part of any one person. You were kind of raised to more believe in like a consumer-based society. Law and other things were kind of held up as these big kind of quarters of what you go into. I'm not saying that that isn't held here, but when I came out here, hearing about something called like a small group or things that are primarily based on like your church or something, it was something that was reserved for the very, very few, very religious-minded sects in New York, rather than here where it's more of a social group.
Mhm.
Back home, I would see that more of, oh, so you're, I know this is a loaded term, but you're a fundamentalist Christian, and you're very in tune with your beliefs and understanding your relationship with God. While out here, it's more of what I would call like a social club, or you would have something like that. And that could be because New York has a much larger population. It's much easier for you to meet other people and to have these diverse groups. While out here, creating an umbrella organization underneath your church or underneath your other group can have a like impact like that. And for a teacher, understanding that and understanding where your community that you're teaching to is important, and making sure that you don't have those previously held beliefs and prejudices impact on your students is some of the like big things that you have to deal with as a teacher. And it's something that will evolve throughout your career. You come to understand your students and the community you teach with.
I think it's hard for somebody to know they have these subconscious like prejudices or these subconscious preferences they have until they get exposed. So
Right.
until you know what's going on, it's just going to be that's going to be your normal. I grew up here in North Dakota. This is a bad example of it, but the words "awe" and "father," the AWE and the FA, those are supposed to be pronounced differently. I physically can't do that just because of the way I was raised. That's a subconscious thing built into my head.
Right, it's like when someone comes from like the South or somewhere and they have a very thick accent.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like that's just built in, and that's your normal. And until somebody talks to you about it, you're not going to know that is different to somebody else. So I think it's a good idea to talk to your students, talk to parents, talk to colleagues about their experiences with this stuff, because it's much easier for you to figure out your subliminal prejudices or your subliminal stuff in your head once you know about theirs.
Yeah.
So moving on to case study 2, Diverse Friends Day. The first question is, what do you think Pam meant when she said, I think Diverse Friends Day is for white people? Can you think of other diversity programs in schools that might elect similar reactions from students of color? So I have some personal experience with this. I am obviously Caucasian, I am white, but I had a very diverse group of friends growing up in high school. We looked around and we saw there was just table of white dudes, table of white dudes, table of Hispanics, table of white dudes, table of white dudes, table of African Americans, people of color, and no one really changed out of the group. And I can say that probably I would have fallen into just a white dude group too, if it wasn't for my first hour freshman year biology teacher who said, okay, randomly draw names out of a hat and that's who you sit by. And I got this great group of dudes and we all had a great time. We all became better, more diverse people because of it. Now, I don't think that it is primarily for white people. I think it's for everybody.
Yes.
Because growing up, you have this group of people who you live with. You have your mother, your father, siblings in the best case scenario. And they most likely are going to have similar traits to you physically and spiritually, emotionally. They're going to be like you. So you find people who are like that. And generally, that's going to be people who are similar color or similar race, ethnicity, or creed to you. So I think this is more of a good implementation of a good idea to expand everyone's social circles. I just think in modern America, it's executed pretty shittily because Americans are pretty shitty.
I agree with you there. And coming out of New York, I've kind of seen that on a much larger scale. You have like Chinatown, Koreatown, little Philadelphia or whatever.
Mhm.
Like you have these little like ethnic enclaves.
Mhm.
And the reason I've studied it moderately in history, the reason why these ethnic enclaves exist is because you have an isolated group of people who feel that they're being like subjected to prejudice or whatever in the world. And in most cases they are. Some cases it might be overblown. But in general you usually have a group of people who feel like the only way we're going to survive is if we stick together. So by sticking together, you get these little tight-knit groups of enclaves, and then by extension, you'll get those same tight-knit groups in high school when you could be going from maybe like 10 people in your graduating class in elementary school to now you're in the like county high school where you don't know anyone.
Mhm.
So you're going to look for someone who you will subconsciously think, I'm going to be safe with them.
Mhm.
So you'll look for, even if they look like you or talk like you, there's something that will draw you to them. And I think it's the job of the teacher to break that up, because without breaking it up, you're just going to keep those same groups going on and on.
Mhm.
And that's what you kind of have in New York, where you have these like tight groups of like Chinatown and stuff. They'll usually last a couple of generations before kids start to actually like grow out of it and realize, oh, I don't have the same accent anymore. I don't really see myself as traditionally Hispanic or traditionally Korean. I see myself more as someone who's into nerd video game culture, so I'll hang out more with these people. Or I'm more of a band geek, so I'll go more with them. And eventually you start seeing people spread out. But without schooling and without these kind of programs like this Best Friend Day, it's not going to happen quickly. It happens very slowly, and that can cause tensions within a community that can overflow and cause problems down the road.
Do you have anything to add, Lisa?
Not on that one, no.
Nice. Me too.
On number 2, how might Losing School address the institutional culture of the school, as well as the racial inequalities being experienced by students, rather than focusing just on race relations and celebrating diversity?
Well, I think it's a complicated issue when you're looking at the greater problem of like race integration and all these other things. Because historically, for most of the 20th and 19th centuries, the U.S. has had these bigger problems with immigration, isolating groups from each other, creating these famous small towns, which then become embedded in the American culture. Like the idea of the gangster coming out of Italy, this idea of the Italian mobster who can speak a certain way and associate with a certain type of person. That whole idea is an inherent problem because you're idolizing certain groups, and once that becomes quote unquote mainstream, then that group has essentially assimilated. But with that assimilation, that also means that another group is going to become the boogeyman or whatever of your society. And it's been happening throughout the U.S. You had the Irish when they first came over, and then they eventually assimilated enough to the point where then the Italians were kind of a big prejudice. And the African American community has just historically always been pushed to the side based on race. So the idea of you fixing that in a school is something that I think is a little bit out of the range of the teacher, but it is something that can be dealt with on a small scale.
It's something that can start there, but you can't fix the world through a class.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a teacher, I can't fix the fact that maybe the 2 African American students I have are in a much poorer area than the rest of my students. But I can start to tailor my lessons to the point where it's, okay, I understand that these students might have problems at home. So therefore, I need to work with them a little bit more than others.
Right.
But I should also try and introduce them to other students who I feel could help them because they have similar interests. Because once you build that kind of friend network and stuff up inside the school, then they won't just have to rely on their resources at home. Now, they might need a ride to the football game. Maybe Jimmy's mom, who is more wealthy and
Can
can
supply
afford
that.
to
Yeah.
have them
Yeah,
come,
yeah, I get
you'll
what you're
bring
saying,
them. So your job is essentially to find these connections, build them, and to ensure that your students are able to succeed, even though perhaps their parents aren't able to help them. So you're just going to be that tertiary asset to them. To be, I'm here. I can either connect you with people, or I can be a resource to myself.
I had nothing to add to that. I think that was exactly.
That was great.
Okay. So I have actual stuff for this next one. Do you mind if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Pam told Mr. C that lunch is the only time in the school where she can relax without feeling judged. Other than students of color, what sort of students might share this experience with Pam? So one of my good friends, I actually room with him now. He is severely dyslexic. He goes into class and he doesn't know what to do. The words all jumble, the math problems all jumble, all that stuff. So for him, he always felt like the teacher was looking down on him in every single classroom he went to, in every single experience, except for stuff like choir or band, where it was just kind of pictures on like a note. Oh, I know exactly what that means. I know what that should sound like. That stuff was easy for him, but math, science, social studies, reading, that was all difficult. So whenever he came to lunch or to PE or something not traditionally scholastic, he felt more safe. He was able to have fun, and that was his favorite time at school. So back to the question, other than the students of color, what sort of students might have shared experiences with him? Anybody who has ever gone through something where they believe a teacher is looking down at them or another student is looking down at them, lunch can generally be a safe place for them. Now, that could be them sitting by themselves watching YouTube and enjoying a good video, or that could be them sitting with friends and joking about how weird that lesson was in their last class. But I think that almost every student can have a safe place at some place like lunch.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I can't speak to it personally because growing up I had not severe but slight social anxiety to the point where I would try and avoid lunch because I didn't want to interact with my fellow students. And I felt more comfortable around the teachers. It just is a phenomenon throughout my life that I feel more comfortable with the older generations and I'm able to associate more with them. Maybe it's because they were more mature and I could, as a historian, I kind of studied like stuff from their culture, so I could make jokes about like JFK or Ike coming into presidency and usually poke fun at them. Like there was one of my favorite teachers, Carly Newsy. He was what we call tech teacher, so he would teach like carpentry and computer skills, which is what like wood shop evolved into in New York. But he used to listen to like different kinds of music, and I'm into more like older like Bach music, like classical. And one time I was listening to it, and he walked in, and I jokingly told him, "So this was the one-hit wonder of your generation." It's things like that, and I felt more comfortable doing it there. So I think it's more of a case of you need to find where your student feels safest, but also when you get to know your students, and if you see them doing something like I did, maybe it might be a good idea to either introduce them to other students who are like-minded, or just to try and point them in the direction of, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. We can work on it together. I can show you another resource if that's more comfortable with you. But here's what the situation is. I'm your teacher. I'm here not to be your friend, but I'm here to make sure that you get the best performance later in life. Because I feel like some teachers they don't coast through it, but because they have to deal with so many different people, it's kind of hard to make these little connections about this student is kind of always in my classroom, but I don't interact with the science department, and the student is apparently failing there. How can I help them here? Or they're kind of always with the faculty. How can I help them teach? So I think that's something that teachers have to also do.
Okay. Our last one is family night. Oh, sorry, Lucy, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, that was great. Yes.
All right. Do you agree with the teacher's conclusion that the evening was not a success for her? So in this, and just as a refresher, because it's not as open as the other ones, there's a school meeting talking about math and giving a little presentation on the kids, and then some parents show up and they sit in spots, and then some teachers and parents sit in the back. and then continue to talk through the entire station. I think if they show up, that's better. Even if one more parent shows up than usual, that is a better thing because it means that they are starting to even care a little bit.
Yes.
Let's say there's 5 families who are consistently going to these school events, and all of a sudden 1 week 7 families show up. There's these 2 new families. That is a success. They went to a school function, and maybe they didn't learn anything. Maybe they didn't take any pamphlets home. They still went, and they're more likely to go again. I think it is a success. I disagree. I think it was a huge success.
I completely agree with you with that. Even I've talked to my boss a couple of times, and he said 50% of the battle of keeping your employees is just showing up. And I've spoken to a couple of my friends who are fathers, and we've joked about different political stuff, but they say half the battle of being a good father is just showing up. If you show up, you can at least show interest in what your kid is doing. You'll probably pick up something, even if it's not your thing. And eventually you'll become a better person because you're actively trying to involve yourself in something that, even though it might not be your cup of tea, you'll be able to slowly start to tailor it to your own needs and find a way to make your own niche in this larger picture.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yes, I agree too.
So,
Two.
Okay. The teachers were careful to try to elevate some potential barriers from participating for ELL families, such as language used in the flyers. What else, if anything, might they have done to make the evening more engaging? I think just giving them that little option of the flyers, that is a good first step. But I think they need to split it up more, and this can be tough. So here, I'm going to read the third one. We're just going to talk about this one big one because I got some points out. Why might some families have remained in the back of the cafeteria rather than joining other families and provided seats? Should the teachers have intervened in some sort of seated families grew frustrated with the noise? I think that going back to the last topic with the Friends Day, ELL families, and this is, I can attest to this, I would go to school functions, I would sit with my friends and their families who we'd always be in the front. In the back, we'd see some Hispanics all just chatting in the back because they were with people they felt more comfortable with.
Right.
Because people are assholes. They would come up, and if somebody sat down who didn't have perfect English, they would be judged. So why would they come sit down in the front with us when they think we judge? We would not judge them at all. We think it's great that they're learning English. I think that's wonderful. You're diversifying your portfolio. You're becoming a better person. But other families would judge them, so they would stay in the back with what they felt comfortable with. I think one thing to do is to have these school functions where let's just take a 2-semester year. For the first semester, it's going to be a little harder for teachers and students. You're going to have 2 presentations, one in English and one in whatever the second most popular language of your school is. So one for North Dakota, at least, that would be English, and then one for Spanish speakers. That would be great. That would make them feel more comfortable at the second one. You can just change the slides. It will not be that hard on you. Most schools have a Spanish teacher that can easily translate and give the presentation. So I think schools starting to integrate that and giving them more comfort there is the best thing to do. So just to sum up, all I want to say is, for a school that's trying to make anyone who's in a natural English speaker more comfortable, give them time where they can speak their own language and get comfortable with the environment, and then throw them into now it's one big meeting, you're going to have to use English now, but you're already in an environment that's comfortable.
And I completely agree with that, and I can kind of attest to that through my own family. Both of my grandparents immigrated here from Cuba when they were about 18, 19. So they always kind of, through their formative, like my age, they always hung out with people who spoke Spanish because it was far easier for them to speak English than Spanish. And I can, even today, my grandfather, he will refuse to say lawnmower because it makes his accent very present. Well, my grandmother, she became a college professor for Spanish. She doesn't care as much about her accent. She's comfortable with it. But growing up, you'll kind of want to keep that English as a second language thing going through your family. And it's very important for the school to come to the understanding that we need to slowly integrate these kids into our greater school system, because at the end of the day, we are trying to teach everyone how to be a good quote-unquote American, or at least a good citizen. And unfortunately, or fortunately, or whatever your viewpoint is, you have to learn English at one point. But how fast you kind of push somebody into that is a very, very important thing. Because if you force somebody to learn English too quickly, they're not going to fully understand the language or fully understand these small little minutiae in there, the like double entendres and cognates or whatever. And then you also have to understand that sometimes parents will never fully understand English because they came here much later in life, which makes it much more difficult for them to interact. My uncle's a teacher down in Florida in a school called in the Seminole School District, and he's bilingual. But because he's a man, they tend to. He's not a Spanish teacher. He's a fourth grade teacher that they kind of push into becoming a special needs teacher, and he doesn't mind that.
Mhm.
But there have been instances where they needed to have a very firm discussion with a student and a parent because the student was failing. And this might just be a weird thing with Florida, but they had him translating instead of the Spanish teacher who was female. So that could show like gender identity or whatever. But there are other issues with trying to get people to learn English. And I think it's important for you to show them that we're never going to judge you for speaking Spanish. We're never going to judge you for not understanding a question. Because if I don't understand a question and you don't understand a question, but the only difference is I don't understand the question because I don't understand the way it's worded, because I'm dyslexic or because I'm speaking Spanish, while you don't understand the question because of core concept. Those are two very different things and requires a teacher to come at it from a very different perspective. If I understand my student doesn't understand the core concept, then I can start reworking that core concept so that way they understand it. If they just don't understand the question because it's a language barrier thing, that's a much easier problem to fix because then I can say, okay, let me phrase this in Spanish or phrase this in a way of English that you would understand. And I think you'll get better results out of your students. And I also think you should never demean your students for speaking Spanish or any language. You just need to be as open with them as possible.
Yeah, completely agree.
I agree too.
Get into that.
No, that's great.
So that is group one's discussion. That is all, I think.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. Okay.